One of the most debated questions in human history that has engaged the collective mind is, who am I? This is the big question. A rhetorical question whose answer we already know deep inside ourselves. An answer which puts an end to human limitations and leads to liberation once we become aware of our true origin, and with it, the awakening process begins. This is what led seekers to set out in the search of the self, on the path to self-realization and self-mastery, discovering mysterious ways of inner engineering and the true meaning of inner alchemy through self-cultivation. There is no destination without knowing the origin. There is no purpose without knowing the power that stands behind it. And that power is the self, the force pervading all things, a power that resides within the center of each being. That which in Hindu philosophy is called the Atman, meaning existence itself, or Brahman, that which expands. Mystics, visionaries, spiritual teachers portrayed the self in many lights. However, the most enlightening was when Christ revealed its true meaning, encompassing the whole creation in a few words. I am that I am. Equally important is the Hindu perspective, which is detached with sacredness from the ancient Vedic texts, bringing to light the powerful mantra from the heart of the Upanishads, Tat Tvam Asi, meaning you are that. They both refer to the same thing, that we are part of the whole, and that at the core of each one of us lays the pure being, which is existence itself, just that we seem to perceive ourselves as pieces divided from the whole. The pure being should not be seen as an object. It is that which lends existence to every other object. It is the power within, beyond everything we identify with, beyond the physical and the subtle body, beyond the mind and the intellect, beyond the person. The self is none of these. It is that which knows and witnesses all these layers of existence. You can imagine these layers as the coverings of a Russian doll, in the center of which we find the self, the experiencer of all these. We are multi-dimensional beings, existing at the same time in several planes, like water, for example. On one hand, it can be liquid or solid, or it can be subtler, oftenly experienced in the visible spectrum, or being found in more refined states, like a fine gas in the atmosphere. Whatever the form is, it is water in its essence, and every drop is part of the same ocean. In the same way, each individual self is part of the Supreme Self, called Paramatman in Vedic Sanskrit. This is unity consciousness. At the core of our being, we are the essence of the divine, our innermost being, the absolute, timeless, and limitless self. Some are firmly convinced that once recognized, the self no longer exists, yet nothing ceases to exist. Nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed. A great theory brought to light by Antoine Lavoisier. On the other hand, some Buddhist schools of thought believe in the concept of non-self, in the void represented by emptiness, defined by nothingness, also called shunyam. It is almost a nihilistic idea to believe that there is no substance to creation. It is like saying, I don't exist. Perhaps it is a misinterpretation. Or maybe after all, the void does not mean that there is no essence, but that the emptiness that they refer to is actually fullness, devoided by object, a state of no experience, only the presence of the all-pervading power of the I Am, the witness, the knower, the watcher of all. Just because a glass is not full with water, it does not mean that it is also empty, but it is filled with air, with space. And so, the existential elements are present in both the form and the formless. They are in constant motion. It is just our perception that needs changing. Energetically, the self resides at the bottom of the spine in the triangular bone called the sacrum. Sacrum means sacred or temple. Surely it was not randomly why it has been called the holy bone. The Kundalini contains the self. It is a force lying dormant at the bottom of the spine, waiting to be awakened. Once the Kundalini energy begins to rise through the central channel, it reaches the top of the head, uniting with the spirit. Here, the self transforms, becoming one with the spirit. It is what some call the higher self. But how did something so close to perfection fall to a stage of unconsciousness? After the original sin, we lost our divine powers. The course of what happened being encoded and written in allegorical form in the scriptures. It only depends on how it is perceived and interpreted. The biblical fall of man is in fact a fall into consciousness, a downgrade from a divine potential, a fall from a higher plane of existence into this low dimension, in this dense plane of this planet. We came here to learn how to transcend matter, how to find balance by experiencing duality, and how to reach the path to unity consciousness. The fall in itself is seen as punishment, but actually it is the helping hand teaching us and guiding us back to the source being. This fall was the fall of the self. In fact, the self is the fallen man, who came here to learn the steps of ascension and how to regain the divine qualities he once had. The self is the one who reincarnates in every given life. After the moment of conception, the self descends as a thread of energy, spiraling into the sacral center. The soul then descends into the heart chakra after 3 months, and the spirit resides in the center of the brain. This sphere of the ultimate soul is in fact a trinity, consisting of 3 layers. the self, the soul, and the spirit. Let us not confuse the spirit with the brain. The brain is a very powerful tool. It is receiving, processing, and transmitting information. It is an instrument designed in helping us to acknowledge reality without distortion. The brain is a decoder of information and a device through which we establish connection with consciousness and communication with the subconscious, like a wireless device. For this very reason, manipulation of self is made via perception. In this way, all the negativity being fed on a subliminal level, straight into our subconscious field, where the self resides. Programming of self takes place for sound, visual, induced thoughts and emotions, suggestion, symbolism, and frequency alteration. In this way, the collective is kept in a deep sleep without people being aware of what is manifesting through them and around them, not being aware of their true purpose, not being aware of the true meaning of life, not being aware of how powerful and wonderful creations they are, not being conscious of themselves. The only way to become self-conscious is to look within, deep down to the bottom of the being, awakening that power within, removing those clouds shadowing the mind, overcoming that false sense of self, removing limitations, and start seeing who we truly are. We are here to heal. We are here to grow. We are here to find our way back home. We are here to become a better version of ourselves. All this is possible only by waking up from this lethargic deep sleep, unleashing our true power. Being lethargic means not being self-conscious, not being connected to the aliveness, and not being able to feel the awakefulness within all things. If we come to give it a deep thought through self-reflection, we would come to realize that all the distractions, the worries, the complexities of life, the desires, and all the programming seem to push us in this deep sleep, completely disconnected from our senses and from life itself. But where do we start dissolving this artificial self? Well, firstly, we should start by finding out what we are made of and understand the functionality of the mechanisms within by discovering the processes that are taking place in the microcosmos, the inner space dimension. After all, there is nothing in the outer anyway. All the answers lay within. So by looking inside, we start deprogramming and reconnecting with our true nature. However, it seems to be a lot of confusion within the spiritual community, as the self is confused with the soul, and the soul with the spirit. This leading people to seek for something, but they do not actually know what they are really seeking for. And so, we do not know where we are going if we do not know where we are coming from. Finding our true nature through self-inquiry would be the first step towards self-realization. Once discovered, we become self-conscious. That is the first stage of the awakening process. Until then, we are basically on autopilot. Now we start seeing everything around us as a projection of the mind. It is like looking in the mirror, where the reflected image of yourself is just a projection through the lenses of the ego. The ego representing the mirror. When the mirror is removed, the attention goes back inwards to the source. So through awakening, we become aware that all those things projected by the world outside are just labels. Now we stop identifying with the body, with the mind, with the intellect, or with the person. We become aware that we are just ultimate presence, witnessing all these layers from a deeper dimension of our being. We are now that which sees everything through the light of consciousness. We are the innermost being, the awareness which arises when we take a step back before taking a step forward. Now we begin self-inquiry and self-reflection from the inner space. By taking that step back, we are able to see the bigger picture from far away. From a psychological point of view, the self is our deepest nature, laying dormant in our subconscious, where we generally shove everything negative under the carpet. Our incapacities, our insecurities, our failed acts, our fears, the trauma, the unhealed emotions, everything that we cannot deal with consciously, thus creating a reflection of the self, a twin, which mirrors the darker nature of the self, that is, the shadow self. This shadow self is not something that we must eliminate, but integrate and heal through deep analysis and shadow work. It is wrong to think that it should dissolve, as it is an integral part of us, the other side of the same coin. Instead, we should learn how to control it, or this will manifest in outbursts of anger and negative actions, the shadow further projecting itself in the collective mind, generating chaos and disharmony, something pretty much visible nowadays, looking at what is happening in the world. That which projects in the mind, giving the sense of pain and suffering, is the shadow self. The extension of the shadow is like the monkey in the mind, that Buddhists refer to as jumping from tree to tree, creating chatter, restlessness, confusion, and no self-control. It is associated with that voice in the head which leads to defragmentation of the mind, when in fact the natural state of the mind is union, is awareness rooted in the present moment. The shadow self is that darker aspect of our being, as we are both darkness and light, yin and yang, intertwined, in constant interplay. This dual matrix underlying creation as polarity. The key is to reach stillness, that point of singularity, the eye in the middle of the hurricane, maintaining balance. However, The system we live in is frequently pushing the energy to the extremes, subjecting ourselves to a borderline reality, always living at the extremities, overwhelmed by fear, unable to keep a steady course. The world has never seen so many seekers as today. These are times of self-discovery and consciousness expansion, a moment of awakening when humanity is facing one of the most challenging times. When the unknown becomes known, everything will be perceived in the form of suffering. The key is to acknowledge this pain as nothing more than a catalyst to inner transformation. Although the mind is the one recognizing it as pain, it is important how we do embrace and integrate this pain. It is, after all, the mind projecting the pain. But remember, we are not the mind. This pain we identify deep within our being becomes the spark that illuminates our true nature. And that true nature is nothing else but the self. It is the star guiding us towards the realization of who we truly are. It is the compass giving us direction on our path. The self needs only to expand. It does not need labeling. It does not need to become something. It does not need to be personified. It just is. The self is the key to liberation from all that means limitation, conditioning, confusion, sorrow, and materialism. As long as we live under their influence, we remain connected to this material plane, unable to see behind the veil of this 3D matrix, behind this limited world called reality. This illusion or Maya is projected straight from the level of the self through the collective mind. The collective self being overshadowed by this hypnotic state of the collective mind, which begins to see through the eyes created by the system we live in. It is not our true side, but as long as we are under the influence of this distortion, an inversion of perception, we won't be able to see the reality for what it is. And so we must change our angle of perception, because self-manipulation is made through perception. This is how we are caught in this game of mental construction, where artificial layers of awareness wrap around the self, leading to an altered identity. The self is our informational and energetic matrix. Ever since we came into this world, we have come like a blank sheet. By default, the genetic information is transcribed at the level of the self, at the level of the human genome, in our DNA. And so, we came with the written programs from the past life, with the divine programs including values and qualities, with a karmic baggage and our dharma, the personal mission. This informational energetic matrix is our blueprint. It is what is called the tree of life, that divine component within us. A pattern seen everywhere in the universe as information and energy. Everything carries vibration and frequency, consisting of an electromagnetic field, generating light. The electromagnetic field has attached to it an inseparable secondary field, the toroidal field, which generates information. The energy represents the deployment force behind manifestation, and the information is the memory of that which was manifested. And so everything that has ever manifested remains registered as memory in the Akashic records, or the universal memory if you'd like. The written information of that which was manifested determines karma, which is good or bad karma, individual or collective. These two components, information and energy, underlie creation, the energy manifested being eternally written in the astral plane. Everything that has ever been said, done, thought, that was intended or felt, it all becomes memory in this vast ocean of consciousness. Surely we all remember the expression, "It is all written in the stars." This is what it refers to. Once these fundamental mechanisms are understood, we begin to see why programming is done at the level of the self, the deepest aspect of being, also an area touched by psychotherapy, regression, and neuro-linguistic programming. It is the easiest area to target. That is why mass manipulation is easily done here, generating a karma that does not spring from free will. In this way, the course of humanity being easily changed. Thoughts and decisions are no longer voluntary. Actions are dictated, and everything that manifests is generating by this artificial mind that is not part of consciousness. All this resulting in unnatural events that have repercussions on the collective and the course of life being totally deviated. Returning to the process of reincarnation, since we were born, we came into this world like a blank sheet, without active programs, but only with the genetic information that carries the programs with which we resonate from past lives. And on this blank sheet, our parents begin to write, and respectively their subpersonalities start projecting on us. Followed by the education system, religion, society, media, the cultural makeup, and all the role models of the systems that we follow. They are all programs where everything is projected at the level of the self, labeling us and defining us as individuals. All this written information, it's a program creating layers around the self, wrapping around it like a bondage. This causing to attain what is called a false sense of self, an altered identity, shadowing our nature, blinding us of who we really are, leading us to believe that we are the person, when in fact, the person is a prefabricated identity, a label. Persona in ancient Greek meaning mask. If you can remember, in ancient times, actors were wearing a mask on stage while playing. The mask symbolizing an alter ego, a false identity of man on the stage of life. one of the major programs is education. Surprisingly, we are mainly educated at the level of the intellect. And I don't dismiss education is not useful. It is. But it just seems to be so incomplete, as there are so many other aspects to cover. In reality, education is also needed at the level of the self, covering deeper aspects of life, like the nature of awareness and learning how to integrate various aspects of our nature. And so, going through various processes of programming, we start to believe that we must become something, that we have to attain a status and a name, that we have to gain material wealth in the individual's minds, this being something offering them some sort of sense of power by proving themselves. It is an illusion altering the individual self, almost dissolving the very true nature. No wonder how come so many feel to have lost themselves in a world full of role models and artificial makeup. We are thrown in a world of temptations driven by the ego, where only I, the individual, matters, where the I has no satisfaction. We begin to chase dreams, having this constant desire to acquire, wanting to gain recognition in the eyes of society, feeling a need for validation in this game of competitiveness, where the society will always show us someone or something that we must overcome in order to stimulate this competitive behavior within ourselves. We unknowingly and gradually start to distance from our true self and from the meaning of life, encased in this distorted perception, away from nature, away from aliveness. All these programs are distracting us from our path, pushing us away from our true purpose. It is almost a hypnotic state which keeps us unaware of ourselves. With time, the true identity is lost, this creating a void inside of us. And no matter how much we try to fill this void with material things, achievements, and oftenly addictions, it will be impossible, because we have lost ourselves, and there is nothing to substitute this emptiness, but rediscovering within. We begin to believe that the only purpose in life is to spend most of our time in a job, in a daily routine. All becomes so repetitive that it's brainwashing, manifesting in a typical space, sitting in a square chair, at a square desk, in front of the square computer, returning home in a square room, in front of the square TV. This model leads to limitation and thinking inside the box. This form creates a strangled perception, which keeps us more and more attached to the material plane. In sacred geometry and alchemical texts, the circle surrounding the square represents spirit over matter. The circle symbolizing the spirit, infinity, freedom, and the square representing matter, limitation, and attachment. We live in a world of form, where symbols have a direct impact on our subconscious, where shape is used in such a manner to impact our frequency and our perception. That is why symbols are so oftenly used, because they work on a subliminal level. And so that's how we become ignorant. The mind is hacked. It is scattered, out of focus, decentered, when in fact we should remain aligned in order to cultivate the spirit and unfold our true potential. It is all about balance and spiritual growth. However, difficult to manifest within a world of limitations. Not that we are limited beings. In fact, we are limitless beings in a world with unlimited possibilities. But it is the mind dictating us all the limitation, and it is perception blinding the self from seeing its true potential. You might be wondering, why do we have to experience life on this planet and go through the struggle of programming, limitation, and suffering? Why go through all these trials? Well, energy, yang, manifests through matter, yin, and planet Earth is a denser plane, destined for manifestation of the spirits that are still caught in a karmic cycle. Here, the spirit experiences consciousness, learning the art of manifestation, which springs from the I Am. Planet Earth is a school planet. It is a school of formation and cultivation of the spirit. It is a place where we learn how to expand consciousness. It is a garden where the seed of life is planted, and that seed is you. The self is the seed, which is planted in the womb and led to germinate, just like all the other seeds are planted into our Mother Earth. In the same way, at the moment of conception, the self is planted into the mother's womb. This representing the earth element, a place of fertilization, nourishment and growth. If we look at its original shape, this is a pattern that is reflected by the creative force in the whole universe. It is a spiraling energy, Kundala, which means coil or spiral in Sanskrit. Hence the name for Kundalini energy. Everything is undulating. Everything is in constant motion, interweaving this net of space with the energy of life. This primordial energy of creation itself, Kundalini Shakti, pervades every living being. It is a snake-like spiraling energy waiting to be awakened, representing the driving force of the self. It has self-intelligence, it is self-empowered, and knows everything about you. We can see this pattern ever since the moment of conception, in the coiled fetus, in the DNA helix, in the fingerprints, everywhere in nature, in the Fibonacci sequence, in some of the crop circles, in the shape of our galaxy, and most importantly, in the ancient symbols representing the passage to the source. The initial stage of existence of the self is the larval stage. After going through the transformational stage, And after reaching spiritual maturity, the self attains liberation. It becomes the butterfly. It becomes knowledge itself. Once the seed is fertilized and energized, the life force springs up through it, rising up, reaching the crown and creating its flowers. We can see this process everywhere in everything around us. It is the miracle of life. In the same way, the Kundalini rises through the 7 chakras, piercing the fontanelle at the crown chakra on the top of the head, creating what is known as the lotus with 1,000 petals, the moment of enlightenment, that very much awaited liberation. When the self unites with the spirit, one becomes illuminated, a realized soul. This is the true rebirth, a baptism in the light of consciousness. In this moment, there is no past, no future, no time, no space, just the presence of the I Am, anchored in the eternal present moment. Suddenly, life becomes effortless, and we enjoy the awakefulness and the liveliness of everything around us, realizing that form is just a product of the mind. We begin to see beyond the veil, where the societal programming has no more effect. We experience oneness and connection in this infinite awareness, without getting attached to any of it, crossing the borders of limitation and separation. In this moment, we are the presence, immersed in the beauty of the pure being. In this moment, we see who we truly are by experience, and not just by belief.